Competitors are not bad news, they simply are the reality of what you're dealing with in the marketplace.
Right.
And they help to define your market journey.
Right.
But it's certainly not something where you want to run away from them. You want to just face up to the reality of that and build your company and your idea to take that into account.
Hey founders, my name is Louis Wong. I'm a founder of Malloy Labs. We are working on a content repurposing platform that helps video podcasters grow. Today, I am with Kris Childress. He is a mentor in residence of NUS Enterprise. I'll be having an in-depth conversation about how startups can identify and assess competitions. Let's get started. Hi Kris.
Louis, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good.
Today's topic,
Yes.
it's about identifying and assessing competitors.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have been running startups for almost your entire career.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we just like to get some understanding on or learnings from you. Pick your brain on some of the things that we would like to learn in terms of how we can identify and assess competitors. So when you start when you launch a project or you start your own company, right? Typically, the first thing once you tell your friend about your idea, right? I think it's quite common that the first thing that comes to their mind is, why won't Meta do this?
We used to call that the Microsoft will crush you question. Why won't Microsoft just come and crush you? I think what you're talking about, not just big, but what we call kind of incumbent competitors. Someone
exactly.
who's already there, established in the market, who's doing to some extent what you're looking at doing. I mean, there's no single magic answer on that. I think you want to go in with your eyes open. You don't want to ignore the fact that there's someone out there. But the other thing is what incumbents do is they also establish your opportunity, because what you'll do is go out and you're looking to say, what is missing in the market now? Can I come up with a solution or product that does something that they can't do that people are really looking for? So you really want to kind of say, what is the space they're in, and not necessarily, you're not going to do well coming out head to head, trying to have an identical product that's maybe just a little bit cheaper or a little more localized or something. You really need to do something significantly different. I've had guys before come in, I'll say, you have what's your competition? And we said, we don't really have any competition. No one's doing this. And I say, well, there are two problems with that. One is no one's doing it, then maybe you don't have a market because you haven't really identified something someone wants to do. And the other thing is, I used to say, give me about 2.5 minutes on Google, and I bet I can find some people that are doing something in this space. And so very quickly, even if you don't know necessarily who your competitors are, a very cursory kind of search will help you to find that. Competitors are not bad news, they simply are the reality of what you're dealing with in the marketplace. And they help to define your market journey.
Right.
But it's certainly not something where you want to run away from them. You want to just face up to the reality of that and build your company and your idea to take that into account.
Right. Well, I usually like to use mental models to help me figure out solutions on how I tackle certain problems, right? Mm-hmm. So if let's say I have already a product, and hypothetically, right, a bigger incumbents are building feature for feature, right? So how should I think about out-competing them, or even like what advantages do I have to say help me be better instead of just competing with at a lower price?
I'd always look and say, if they actually somehow are coming up feature for feature, you may have a challenge. It may mean a couple things. One is you may need to go a different direction. Say, okay, they're really just owning this space, so I'm going to go over to some other space nearby and do something somewhat different. I mean, I guess an example one time is we worked in a situation and people there were a lot of people working in a particular type of material, but we found that our market actually was in another material in another area. It was slightly different. And so we took our expertise and we went over and applied it in that space. And then the other reality is that in addition to looking at that is to come in and say, maybe there's maybe there's another market I need to look at. In other words, not just adjacent, but maybe I need to pivot over and look at someplace that this company is not looking. So they're developing a solution for all these people, but it doesn't really fit the needs of some significant group of people, and you go over and market to that. That's sort of sometimes where you come up with a disruptive kind of product. Like in your case, they've sewn up perhaps the English language market in North America, but when they start coming into Asian languages, suddenly it's a whole new ball game, and it requires really people on the ground that understand, that can look at the context, and I'd say, okay, let me focus on those areas, and once I really have established myself, then I come back and look at that market. The other possibility is that today's competitor may be tomorrow's partner or tomorrow's acquirer. So you also want to look at them that way and say that,
join them.
Or eventually they may insist that you join them, and hopefully it's a good deal all around. Like I'd say keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So you really want to look at it and say, what are they doing? And perhaps my long-term path, today they're a competitor, tomorrow they might be someone that we're going to partner with, or I'm going to acquire them, or they're going to acquire me, depending on the situation.
I agree. And also, like, especially for SaaS product, there isn't really it's quite easy to enter the market.
In a sense, I think that's true, but to enter it correctly is always a bit of a challenge. It's superficially easy to develop a software product, but sometimes the challenges are really understanding the problem, solving it correctly, and developing enough scale to make your product work in a market.
It just sounds like you are saying, to one of the strategy, it's really to go niche, right?
When we talk about like a launch market, we're always say, is there a market, a subset of the overall market you're looking at, where you can really own that market, where you can very quickly become a major player in that particular subset. So, for example, let's just say small clinics, that there's a particular need there, and I've identified that for my product, and I go in and I take all of those clinics and I really establish myself, and pretty soon I would say within this geographic area, I'm really well known in those clinics, and then I begin to leverage that and say, okay, how then do I move into other markets from there? So rather than trying to spread yourself out and go everywhere, you really focus on and really understand that. Also, that makes it hard for competitors to come in because they don't have the network of contacts. They don't have the depth of understanding of that particular market. And a lot of times, like I said, they may eventually say, we would rather partner with you or acquire you or make your product an extension of our line, rather than coming in and trying to compete head to head.
In my case, when I look at competitors,
and maybe tell us a little bit about what you're doing that might help us to understand that.
Right. So Malloy Labs is helping video podcasters to repurpose their content by generating accurate transcript, and then using the accurate transcript and try and repurpose it in different ways. Say like finding relevant clips to help them re-engage their audience, things like that. So one of the things that when I was doing competitor research, is that while we do have a robust set of features where they can do, say, generate accurate transcripts, repurpose their content, there are users who typically only require, say, like one part of the feature. So in terms of like the smaller competitors, let's say we already found our product market fit.
Okay.
And there are users that are the retention of our users are at a decent rate, and they are continuously using our product, which is product market fit. And then how do we make sure we stay ahead of our competitors?
You have to out-innovate everyone else. That's usually the idea. One thing to look at is saying, what are the right sets of features? Occasionally, competitors will come in and think that the approach is, I want to just provide a much more massive system, but then there's a learning curve. There's a
like Salesforce, They just build like 200.
They just do something massive. Features. So again, keep your product really focused on the market you're in, and try to do things where it becomes harder in a sense to change from your product to another. So you have a very straightforward learning curve. You have some unique little buttons. Maybe you have some proprietary things that you've done in it that are new, and also you're looking and saying, okay, what is it that this particular market wants? How do I keep adding that in a very systematic fashion. But sometimes the challenge with a very big company is they come in and they've got lots of resources and they'll produce something that maybe it technically is more powerful, but it's also a monster to use. And
Right.
So you look at it and say there's not necessarily big and rich is not always necessarily right, but having a product that fits the needs of the customer and develops customer loyalty. This also means in some cases, sometimes people also will build up communities of users. So the user feels like I have an investment in your company.
Right.
So you have users, you develop people who are experts, you provide certification, you give maybe free. A lot of companies, as they get to a certain size, they start providing free copies to, say, universities or training schools. So when people come out, they're used to using that already, and it's the thing they choose. So it becomes begin to think of a strategy where you make it more difficult for other people to come into your market.
Right.
And again, pricing may be part of that, but it's not just pricing. Price is one of the things we consider, but it certainly isn't everything.
Yeah. I think at least for pricing, when looking at other competitors, we just commoditize our product and then we are trying to compete purely based on lowering our prices. I think, but again, that's like the most obvious strategy. I think that we try to deploy.
The cheap but good strategy.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily.
Not so sustainable.
Yeah, actually, in fact, recently we did we had some experiment on one of our pricing. We initially tested selling one of our tiers at 1,200 minutes for, say, $19. We just released it to release some ads and tested it. We had a higher conversion when we changed it to 120 minutes for $19.
Run by again. You went from what to what?
We went from 1,200 minutes to 120 minutes for the same price.
Okay.
Yeah, we did a few other changes on our pricing page by highlighting that this is what you cannot do on the trials. A lot more factors that contributed to why they're converting, but I just thought that was like an interesting way. So meaning that lowering price or giving more, it is the same price tiers, right? We didn't change much.
The product definition was slightly different.
Exactly, yeah. The messaging on how we display the way we display the price is different.
Okay.
So instead of like doing what you get for trials, what you get for the mid tier, and what you get for a custom tier, and the alternative was what you don't get in trials, and then what you get in the mid tier.
So this is interesting. The little tricks people have, like I have a super expensive version that relatively few people get, and then I have a very basic version that very few people get because it's so basic, and then that kind of drives people towards the one in the middle. So there's a lot of pricing strategies where you help people frame, in effect, what they're doing. And again, like I said, pricing is part of competition, but I like to think of it as kind of sometimes at the end of the day when price is something you come back to when you've looked at everything else that's going on.
I think, like, this is my hypothesis, that if we were to, like you said, build a community that where we can truly, we are still at our early stages, right? I think one of the missing part for me was to first get our customers and then go and figure out what they want. But instead, right now, what we're trying to do to beat the competition is to first create so much value for our target audience, which is video podcasters. So what we do is, for example, we create like 100 different prompts for your video podcasting processes, 50 different GPTs plugins you can use. We curated a bunch of AI tools, even our competitors, so that they can look through all of the different tools they can use to help with their content creation journey. And what we are trying to do is basically form this community first before we start pushing the product
So you're actually, in effect, sometimes you're even a gateway for competitors' products if they'll do a better job for your customer. But you look on them as being you're creating a kind of ecosystem.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. There was a guy in the States. This is a famous story. He was in personal home swimming pool maintenance, and it was again, like you mentioned, a very commoditized market.
Yeah.
And he came out with this really weird idea, which people thought he was crazy. He said, I'm going to create a website. And this was back some years ago when that was relatively new. I'm going to create a website and all the questions that people want to ask about maintaining your pool, and all who should I get and what should I look for and how regularly they should do all these things, all the things that people come and ask us as a provider. I'm going to put like FAQs and things. And I'm also going to put links to all of my competitors. And of course to myself. I'll have a page for myself. And people said, that's crazy. You're going to give them, you're going to bring them and they're going to go all to your competitors. But he said, no, in the end of the day, the people came in and said, why would I go to this guy's competitors? He's answering all my questions. I'm coming to his page. He was even letting me look at his competitors. I'm going to stay with him. And he actually saw a huge increase in business, kind of saved his business at the end of the day. It's a radical kind of rethinking of the idea of competition, and it's thinking about it not from me as a company, what I'm doing, but it's thinking about it from the perspective of your customer and saying, what is your customer's, we overuse this term, job to be done? And how do I build a competitive strategy which may actually, I want to be the go-to person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have this idea or strategy that I'm thinking of deploying for our product. Generally speaking, my team consists of all engineers, right? So I think what typically happens is we tend to just build things. We are not extremely business oriented per se. And then the problem that we have is it becomes feature creep, right? So we just build more and more feature. And that's how we think about beating competitors, is if we can have, say, support multi-language. We have more feature than our direct competitor. This is strategy we deploy to try and compete with them. I like to hear your thoughts. Like, how do we stop thinking like that? More features means better product. I mean, and then beating competitors.
Okay. Again, it's the tricky thing of understanding it from the users and the consumer's point of view. And so, I hate to say it's like have fewer features or more features. It's in fact having a product that's designed to be very easy to use, where I kind of go and use it without even thinking about it. And again, I'll go back in ancient history when we had search engines. And the whole approach of search engines was said, my search engine has all these different little boxes and all these different specialized areas in it, and you can do all these very kind of arcane searches and everything. And it was a very challenging. And when Google came in, their breakthrough was they said two things. One is people want something fast. I want to get answers back not in like a couple of minutes, which sometimes searches would take with the other systems. I want to get it back in a second or two, or a few seconds at the most. And then the other thing is they wanted something simple. And the first time I ever came in and looked at the Google search, the very early one, is it was just a search field. You just type in your search and search. And it just kind of blew your mind because no one had ever done anything that simple. The way they designed it is to say, we want to make it really easy to use it. And I think they still have been, in that search engine, they've been pretty good going forward. They've added lots more. You have more options, but it still comes back to saying, I want to make it really easy to use. Some people actually, like my father, he took on the internet relatively late in life. To him, the internet was Google. The internet was Google because that's all he would ever go on the internet was he would just go Google stuff. And that's where you want to be, in effect, with your product, is thinking of it that way. How do I make it something that it's just people's go-to? And a lot of engineering, but I don't necessarily push all the engineering in the face of my consumer, but I want to make it accessible to them. So the other day I was just watching, it was interesting, I was watching a video. I hear a voice and I see these guys talking, and the captions don't match what they're saying at all. And what I realized is that because I knew one of the guys, and they're actually not speaking English. They're doing the interview in German, but they're doing a voiceover in English.
Sure, yeah.
And the English voiceover doesn't match the text at all.
Right.
So I mean, and again, it's an example of here's a problem you see sometimes when you say, okay, I have a voiceover here, I have the original text and transcript here in the original language. Now, how do I make sure that all of my various versions of this all sync together? So again, thinking about that, and again, this really requires talking to customers and saying, what are your headaches? What do you struggle with? Or what do you not do now because it's so difficult?
Right. So it's more like just finding like the epicenter of like the true value that well, the ultimate goal, right? The outcome that they are looking for, and then build feature towards that instead of features. Another way to provide value, it could be in different forms, not just engineering features.
Right.
It could be content, right? So an example would be our tool does repurposing to help YouTube podcaster grow. So ultimately, the goal is to increase your view counts or subscriber count. And while I was, sifting through materials to figure out what really helped them, how to help them grow subscriber and say views, right? What I realized is that there are certain, say, checklists that they do to help optimize the content that they push out. So I was wondering, right, if let's say we have different tiered pricing compared to our competitors, like does it make sense if say we charge if let's say in our product, right, while using our tool, we add value, we add something really simple like a checklist for you to say, this is how the YouTube algorithm is right now. This is the best way for you. If you were to go through all of these different items, this is the best way for you to get a viral content out to market it to your audience.
I guess what I always look at it and say, what are the headaches that my customers have today, and how do I solve that? There used to be this ad in the U.S. where you'd see these guys go around, and when they had a problem in their office, they hit this big red button, and then they would get whatever they needed from the office supply store. So you kind of want to be that. Okay. I want to be that. I want to solve that problem for people, and I want to do it intuitively. But again, coming back to competition, obviously you guys are not the only one. Everyone's going to be looking that way. But I think what you're giving me, the point I'm making, I think you're saying is we know our customers better. We know where they're struggling, where they can't scale, where they're saying, oh, I can't do this because I've got to hire more people. Right. But you're saying, hey, what if you didn't need to hire people? What if you could do this just by adding another tool? Right. Or just by adding going to the pro version of what we have. And then the other thing, of course, is to come in and say, in that case, is to say, let me let you try that. So for the next month, we'll give you a free access to all these tools. And then at the end of the month, if you don't want it, no problem. We'll go back to the current version. If you do want it, periodically during the month, we'll ask, would you like to upgrade your version? So you think about it. So increasingly what you find is different tiers. Sometimes a free tier, then there'll be a kind of a mid-range tier that fits it, and then there'll be maybe a pro version. But again, tiered pricing is fine, but you also always want to make sure that you don't make it so complicated that people kind of get confused as to what they need. So typically the idea is that maybe you give more tools than you might want in some cases, but at least you group it together. It's really a lot about how you run your business and understand your customer.
The reason why I was bringing those things up is because the goal that I want, or that I'm trying to strategize, is how can I charge way higher than my competitor, but not just by building more features. Like so for example, right? Like now, let's say just transcription alone, which is what we initially offer. Say we offer like $20, right? And when I just go, research on all the other different transcription, it's not as good, right? They have to try out our product before they know that it's better and more accurate. But they are charging like say $10 for unlimited minutes, for example. Obviously, they are not as sophisticated in terms of engineering. They are using a lousier, say, AI model to transcribe their the videos or audio file. Then I'm just thinking to myself, like, if these companies or projects comes up, similar startups like comes up every 1 or 2 days, right? That they're like 10 different similar products that is launching every day. Especially if you just look at like Product Hunt, like everyone is doing like almost the same thing, which is why it got me thinking, like, okay, I try to work backwards, right? What if I want to charge $200 for one customer instead of like $10 and then $19? What do I do? Or what are the values that I can provide without building as much features? Because when we build more features, more maintenance we need to design, and then we need
steeper learning curve.
Yeah, exactly, and it gets super complex, which then brings me to the point, like, there are other ways that we can provide value. I haven't tested it yet, so that's just like how I'm thinking about it. But maybe your thoughts on how would you charge, say, if you were to work backwards, right? If you want to charge, like, crazy amount of money for similar product.
The challenge when you start charging a lot of money to somebody for something, and I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with it, is you always have to look at it and say, is it at some point where they simply start sort of objecting, not because necessarily you're not providing value, but because I have this perception that this should be $20 and now you want to charge me $200.
Yeah.
So the only way to do something like that usually is you almost have to redefine the space your product is in. I'll give you an example. Of course, the classic one that comes up that is becoming a bit worn now would be the iPhone.
Right.
When they came up with the iPhone, they said, okay, he didn't say this is just a new phone that has all these cool features. He came in and said, it's a computer. It's an internet portal, and it's a phone.
Yep.
Right, that was his whole pitch. It's all these three. So you began to say it's no longer am I buying a phone. I'm buying this all-in-one super apparatus that does all these things. And so where I'm used to maybe paying a couple $100 for a smartphone with limited capabilities, suddenly I pop up and pay $1,000 or $1,500.
Yeah.
And people wait in line, for a day when the new phones are launched to get in and buy them.
Yeah.
But because what happens is it's a challenge, but they had to redefine those as a fundamentally different kind of product. And that may take you longer to get to that point. It's not necessarily something that you can always do in the very earliest days. So you have to look and say, how do I do that? Do I need more resources? Do I need partnerships? And when the iPhone, they had a whole series of things. So they had like the iTunes was a huge launch that came out at the time, and suddenly all this content was married with it, and it was also a source of revenue. And they found they had to partner with the telcos, because you say, okay, I'm going to sell the hardware, but I have to have a telco to kind of partner with, and they kind of soften some of the costs because they then build it into your monthly phone bill. And looking back, it was a lot of brilliant kind of insights in doing that. But they had to reframe it and not say, I'm no longer selling you a phone, I'm selling you something that you'll look at differently than you looked at it before. Now people come and copy them. You have Android and others that come in and copy them, but they have their own, competitive strategies for the walled garden, and all the Apple devices talk to each other. So there are ways to do that. So the space you're working in, I would say you probably would have to think, if you wanted to charge that kind of money, if you want to go, I want to be 20 times as expensive as my current competitors, you're probably going to have to think of a way of redefining your product so that people look at it differently. It's not just a better version of this thing. It's something fundamentally different. So if you, and I'm just going to throw this as an example, you come in and say, instead of being a transcription technology, it becomes a content repurposing technology. And I'm going to pull all your content from all your sources, all your archives. We can pull it together. We can produce transcripts. We can tag them. We can make them searchable. We can repurpose them on other platforms. We can set up scheduling. And again, this would be a massive kind of product to come up with, or to move towards. but it would be fundamentally different. It would no longer be just a transcription service.
Sure.
It would be a content
Repurposing.
repurposing and integration service. And you might say, hey, we think we could do that. We can come up with that. But then you need to go test that market and say, are people looking for that?
Right.
And you have to say, I'm creating a fundamentally new thing. So the other approach is to say, before I do that, is there something I can do that's simpler, that I can establish a breadth of market, a user base of people that okay, I'm not going to be 10 times as much, but maybe I can be 2 or 3 times as much, but I'm perceived as being, I'm the best whatever. And maybe some of the things that you're going to build into this final monstrous system, you put into that original version. But then eventually you may pair it off and have just a simple transcription tool, which is still the best in the market that competes in that. But then I have this mega content repurposing tool.
Well, is it just creativity around messaging? Because I mean, fundamentally, the product is very similar, right? Like
but you're probably going to find there are going to be some things you may need to do in it, just like Apple did. I have to have a really good camera in that, and I don't really have a good camera to start with. It wasn't really what they had done traditionally, So they had to do, I had to have a really nice touch screen, multi-touch screen. So you might find that there's some things to do to launch that complete product. You might need to do something different, or find, license some technology to incorporate. And again, I don't know the space. If you can do it now, obviously, if you can reposition and say, this is now, like I said, this mega content tool, then that's something to go ahead and look at. But you really need to understand from the market kind of what people might anticipate and the willingness to pay for that.
Right.
And launch in that space. And then you would still probably have a version out that's a simplified version that sort of competes in the traditional space, because it becomes an on-ramp.
You mean like tool. Funnel?
Yeah, it becomes a funnel. It becomes like, this is the first, you buy my baby version, and eventually you come to my real version.
Because I also realize, I mean, the higher I charge, right, looking at examples, it tends to get less scalable.
Yeah.
Because the expectation of the kind of service that you provide, it's way higher, right? And also, like, when we charge something really cheap, then the audience or the clients that we get has a very different expectation of it. And surprisingly, I think when you charge lower price, customer gets more demanding. Not sure why. I guess
a friend at work one time in polling, and he said there's this phenomenon, the difficult to serve bargain buyer.
Okay, I think it's because they are not as invested in
not as sophisticated, both sometimes too.
Right. Because if, let's say, like, they actually put in some effort into learning the product. Say for example, actually, maybe, like, as counterintuitive as it is, some of the complex tool works is because I put in a lot of effort to already learn. Say for example, recently we just tried using MailChimp, right? And I spent like maybe a day and a half trying to understand like how automation works in MailChimp. How do I like set up taggings and stuff like that. And by the time I was realizing like, wait, I already learned most of the things that I need to do or I want to do from email transaction tool. It is quite hard for me to start adopting a different technology. I just thought that was
it's the old joke of the QWERTY keyboard. We have a certain format, you're used to that. It's very hard to change out of that once you're used to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's a learning curve and there's an unlearning curve. Right. And there's a learning curve when you look at something new.
What advice would you give startups that are operating in a highly competitive market?
Well, I guess the question I always come in and say is that if you're interested in going and meeting a need, addressing a pain or something, and you'd say, but I can't go into this market because I have a lot of competitors, then I would suggest that you haven't identified the right pain or the right need. So, I mean, kind of upfront, when you say I don't want to go to this market because there are
Yeah.
a lot of competitors, it means that you haven't discovered the gap out there. So as long as everyone's happy with what they have,
Right.
no one really has any dissatisfaction, and there's no real way you can change things. Everyone's happy with their ugly phone with buttons on it, the BlackBerry click. If they really are truly satisfied with that and they don't want anything new, then probably not a market to enter. You need to look somewhere else. I mean, that's just my gut feeling. I would say don't come in with a Me Too product, even if or just a slightly better or slightly cheaper or slightly cooler, whatever version of what's out there, because it's going to just kind of fall within that perception. You really need to come with something that meets a specific need, kind of this disruptive innovation idea. You meet the specific need of some group that's not being met now, in terms of simplicity, in terms of cost, in terms of features, in terms of the language, whatever it is, that meets that need really, really well, and then move into other areas. Or you need to say, I need to look at doing something else, maybe a completely different market.
Well, sometimes when you are in a highly competitive market, do you agree that the innovation could also be purely finding the customer first? So the innovation is how you reach out to the customer. Do you think that works? So for example, like let's say I'm doing pool cleaning, I managed to reach out to this customer first. In maybe say I managed to somehow automate direct mailing.
Could be. Yeah.
Right? Do you think then it's a good reason to get into a highly competitive market?
And I guess there's no right or wrong answer, but I think in general, to me, it would sound like not a very sustainable kind of advantage, because my competitors eventually will find it out. If my product is roughly the same and does roughly the same, but I found a more effective way to reach customers, in many cases, it may not be. If it's a product that's already commoditized and I happen to be in a commoditized business, then that makes sense. Like the example the guy gave of the pools, I thought it was brilliant because he was already in a commoditized business and he managed to distinguish himself. But he didn't go into pools saying, I'm going to launch a business in here and then I'm going to make myself distinctive by doing this. Because actually that product was the product of years of experience and really knowing his business very, very well. It would have been very hard as a newcomer to come in and have his FAQs and all the information, because you'd be learning for yourself what needed to be in that area. So I'm not saying there's no right or wrong answers, but I typically say you should provide a greater customer delight or greater customer satisfaction for the product, for the customer you're targeting, versus just, and the business model then comes next, the promotional model, the sales conduits and things like that. Now, having said that, it could be sometimes if you came in and said, the old thing was that if you have a product that's more or less a commodity, but you have a truly breakthrough way of reaching customers, that might work. But again, you're always in danger that how quickly can your competitors duplicate that. So, for example, the first guys that went and did online, began selling their products online, it was a real breakthrough and they did really well. And there's Amazon obviously is the big guy, but lots of other companies came up with their own online storefronts and they did well, and they had probably some good years, but eventually everyone comes up with an online store. So it's not, it becomes from being an innovation and a breakthrough, it becomes again kind of a standard expectation of people.
Because it depends on how companies define success as well, right? Like if let's say you have a handful of customers and you are getting recurring revenue every month and you're profiting, then that's actually how service agency works, right? Like marketing agencies. I'm not sure if they are always offering something different. I sometimes feel like they are offering very similar services, which is obviously highly competitive. It's just the way they reached me was probably a more innovative.
I think it's a way to establish yourself and maybe build business.
What materials would you recommend people, or any books you want to recommend to people who want to outsmart their competitors?
Well, I always look at anything having to do with sales and business development. So look at books like Spin Selling or things like that, and really understand that my background really is out of business development and sales. And I think a lot of times that's really valuable because it really teaches you to think of things from the customer's perspective and from how they buy.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, the real competition is if you can get your product. Now, I'm not saying that the other things you mentioned about different distribution models or promotional models and things are wrong. They're important. But at the end of the day, if you can approach the customer and sell more effectively than your competitors, that's one of the most important things you can do. And there's lots of things that are being written on competition.
Right.
Some of them are probably good. I've never found one book that I would say, hey, this is the ultimate go-to. And maybe my lack of familiarity with the literature, the one go-to book. But I would look a lot and think about it as an effect, in some respects, a sales problem.
Right.
And that will also help you to think about competition. So, for example, I worked in a company one time, and we developed a product that we were selling it for about $3,000, but when people would see it, it looked very much like a $300 product.
Sure.
We were selling a laboratory equipment, but it looked very much like something you would buy at Walmart in the U.S. for a few $100s. And people were getting confused about it, and they would say, "Well, why am I paying you $3,000 for this one? It looks just like this other thing that's $300."
Yep.
And I actually sat down and wrote an FAQ, which is why is it different? And we had differences in terms of its operating parameters, its airflow, the way it was designed, the way it was tuned, lots of things. So it was really a piece of laboratory equipment, and just like military grade, it was designed to operate differently. But we had to actually provide something to people that would help them understand it. So I was the first one. It snowed one day. I got stuck at home, and I spent the day writing the first version of that. And later the company came out with a series of those for different products.
Right.
But again, back from the customer's perspective, if I'm looking at it and I have all these options, how do you make it easier and make me justify buying your product? Or how do you make your product so distinctly different from the other ones that it's my default I go to? And that takes time. That doesn't happen necessarily overnight. It's a long-term strategy that you build over time. Over time to do that. And I point back. You can point back to good examples of like I said, Apple. If you can see the BlackBerry movie, that's really an interesting one to see because it's dramatization. But BlackBerry launched from kind of nothing, and everyone thought they were crazy, and then they came up with this super product. In fact, my wife used it for a while. I jokingly called it the Crackberry because she was always on it, always on it. But then when the iPhone came in, it completely uprooted it. Yeah. And sometimes there are things we can talk about, but when you see something like that kind of dramatized, it helps you to begin to understand how easy it is to underestimate competitors, easy it is to kind of misunderstand what the market's looking for, and kind of begin majoring in the minors. Right. And really, you have to again focus back. What does the customer want? What does the customer need? What is the market looking for? And that's really the key thing.
All right. That's all the time we have today.
Okay.
Thanks, Kris.
All right. My pleasure.